Hello everyone and welcome to Questline. Now today's topic is going to be a little sensitive. Not explosive, not dramatic, but quietly controversial in the way that most people don't really talk about. And before anyone jumps to conclusions, this is not a rant about animals. And it is not an attack on pet owners. That would be far too easy to do. Instead, what I want to do is what I usually do here on Questline. Observe a pattern, sit with it, and ask whether it reveals a blind spot in how we live together as a society. Because sometimes the most normal thing in everyday life are the least examined. They become cultural habits, assumptions, and background noise. And one of those assumptions, at least here in the UK, is how we treat domestic pets, specifically cats, in shared living environments. Now, I want to be very clear from the start. I am not anti-cat, I am not anti-pet, and I am definitely not here to demonize people who genuinely love their animals. What I'm doing is observing something that keeps coming up in modern life. The point where responsibility, personal space, and shared living collide. And yet, we rarely question the system behind it. So today, rather than shouting or blaming, I want to step back, have a proper think, and examine the cultural assumptions, the legal gap, and the wider social consequence of something most people take for granted. Section 1. The law and the legal gap in the UK context. Let's start with something a lot of people believe, but very few people actually check. In the UK, there is not a neat little law that says cats have a legal right to roam. But in practice, cats are culturally and often legally treated as free-roaming domestic animals, in a way that's very different from dogs. Because with dogs, the exception is clear: control, responsibility, accountability. We have laws and enforcement around dangerous behavior, around public spaces, and around hygiene issues like fouling. With cats, it is far more relaxed, not because cats are officially above the law, but because the system has historically treated them as semi-independent animals. So what you end up with this quiet legal and cultural gap, where a domestic animal can be owned, fed, housed, and cared for, but still be treated as if its behavior and impact is simply part of nature. And I am not saying that to provoke outrage. I'm saying it because it's intriguing. It is one of those areas where society's assumptions can survive for generations without being properly questioned, until modern life starts rubbing against it. Section 2. Historical origins. Why this norm exists. If we want to understand why this norm exists, we have to look at history rather than emotion. Historically, cats were not primarily companion animals in the way we often see them today. They were functional animals, pest control, farm protection, and rodent deterrents. In agricultural societies, roaming cats were not just tolerated, they were useful. They protected food stores, reduced rats and mice, and helped manage problems that were generally life-affecting at the time. So culturally, the freedom of movement made sense. It served a purpose. It wasn't a lifestyle choice or an emotional debate. It was practical. And when something is practical for long enough, it becomes normal. It becomes part of the background. The issue is that background did not disappear when we moved into modern living. It simply followed us forward, quietly, into towns and cities. Section 3. Modern society shift. Urban reality. Fast forward to today, to the environment we live in is completely different. We are not mostly living on farms with barns and open land. We are living in dense neighborhoods with smaller gardens, closer boundaries, shared spaces, and completely different expectations about privacy and hygiene. For many families, the garden is not just a little bit of land at the back. It is where our children play. It is where people decompress. It is where you go for air when your head is full. And we also have better sanitation systems in place. The old practical necessity of cats roaming for pest control is not what it used to be, especially in modern residential life. And yet, the cultural assumption remains cats roaming is just normal. It is just expected. And if it causes problems, well, the problem experiencing the problem is often expected to deal with it. So the question becomes, have our social norms kept pace with our living conditions? Because modern life is not built around open roaming in the way older rural life was. Modern life is built around boundaries. Section 4. Global perspective. Bigger than the UK. Now, although we're talking about the UK, it would be intellectually dishonest to assume this is only a British issue. Cats have existed alongside human societies across the world. Europe, Asia, the Middle East and beyond. And in many places, historically, they were valued because they reduced rodents. So the basic pattern is not uniquely British. The pattern is human. Cats were often semi-integrated into human life, close to us, helpful around us, but not necessarily contained in the way we think of modern pet ownership. And then societies urbanized across the West and the East, and living conditions changed dramatically. Smaller private spaces, higher population density, more shared living, a bigger focus on hygiene, personal boundaries, and the mental well-being of home life. But cultural expectations often lag behind structural reality. So it is possible that what we're talking about here isn't just a local pet problem. It might actually be a modern dilemma, how historical animal norms intersect with contemporary urban living. Which means this discussion doesn't have to stay trapped in one country. It is part of a broader conversation about how modern societies update old assumptions. Section 5. Responsibility and accountability. Core argument. Now we get to the philosophical heart of it. In most areas of society, ownership and responsibility go together. If you choose to own something that can impact other people, whether that is a vehicle, a business, and yes, even an animal, there is expectations that you carry responsibility not just for the benefits, but for the external impact. And this is where I want to be very clear. Animals behave according to instincts. It is not about blaming cats. Cats are going to do what cats do. The real question is the human one. What does responsibility look like when we live beside one another? Because in modern shared living, we don't get to pretend our choices exist in isolation. If my choices consistently affects my neighbor's space, well-being or hygiene, then a mature society usually expects some form of accountability. So the inconsistency is worth examining. Why do we have a strong cultural and legal expectation of containment and responsibility with dogs, but far less clarity with cats? I'm not saying cats are the same as dogs in behavior. They are not. I'm saying the principle of responsibility should not vanish simply because the animal is culturally framed as independent. Section 6. Hygiene, safety, and shared spaces. There is also a practical layer to this that people often avoid because it sounds petty. But it is not petty when it is repeated. Not everyone owns pets. Not everyone wants pets. And people should not automatically be expected to manage the consequences of animals they don't want. And people should not automatically be expected to manage the consequences of animals they do not own. And yes, hygiene matters, especially for children who don't understand risk properly, and for people who are vulnerable and have health complications. A private garden is often treated like a safe extension of the home. It is where kids run around. It is where families relax. It is where people go to breathe and to unwind. So when someone repeatedly has to deal with unknown animal waste on their property, whether you call that minor or not, it can create frustration, stress, and even anxiety over time. And what makes it worse is not just the mess, it is the feeling of helplessness, the sense that the system says, just put up with it. That is exactly how quiet resentment forms in communities. Section 7. The system's blind spots. Psychological observation. As a psychology graduate, I tend to look for patterns underneath the surface. And the pattern here isn't hatred, the pattern is silence. It is the fact that many people feel discomfort about certain things in shared living, but don't speak openly because it's socially awkward, or because they don't want backlash, or because they are told it's not a big deal. But unspoken frustration do not disappear, they accumulate. And when they accumulate, what you get is an us versus them mentality. Not because people want conflict, but because the conversation never happens calmly at the earlier stage. So rather than letting that quiet resentment grow, I think it is healthier, psychologically and socially, to discuss the blind spots directly without demonizing anyone. That is what this is. Not a crusade and not a witch hunt. Just a calm conversation about whether the modern society needs clearer expectations around responsibility in shared environments. Section A. Counter-arguments, intellectual fairness. Now, to be fair, there is a strong argument on the other side. Many people genuinely see their pets as family. Many cats benefit from enrichment, and outdoor access is culturally normal here in the UK. It is also true that cats are typically less physically dangerous to the public than dogs, so people will argue the risk profile is different. And that point is not unreasonable. And yes, it is also true that not everyone has the same housing situation. Not everyone can easily build a contained outdoor space. So I'm not pretending this is a simple issue with a simple solution. I'm not pretending that one policy change will magically fix everything. The goal of raising it is not to win. It is to widen awareness and create a discussion that can actually hold complexity, rather than shutting down instantly with, well, that's just how it is. Section 9. Constructive paths forward. A balanced blend. So if we're going to raise the question, we also need to be responsible enough to ask, what would a path forward even look like? Because it is easy to point out the blind spots. It is harder and more important to talk about improvements. And I want to acknowledge something. I don't believe most pet owners are careless or malicious. Many people generally do not want to inconvenience anyone. The issue may not be bad intent. It may simply be unclear expectations. So a constructive path forward could include both cultural and policy thinking. On the cultural side, better public awareness would help. Simple guidance that says, if you own an animal in a dense community, think about impact, not just affection. Love and responsibility are not opposites. If anything, love should increase responsibility. On the practical side, more people could be encouraged to explore containment options that aren't cruel or extreme. Closed gardens, cat-proof fencing, supervised outdoor time, things that reduce nuisance while still respecting animal welfare. And on the policy side, maybe the system needs clearer nuisance pathways, not to punish people, but to prevent neighbours from feeling powerless when a repeated issue becomes a real stressor. It may also be worth recognising that one cultural norm doesn't fit every environment. Rural and urban contexts are different. What works in one doesn't always work in the other. The point isn't control for its own sake. The point is aligning responsibility with modern shared living in a way that reduces conflict instead of feeding it. Section 10. Personal context revealed. Now I want to be honest about why I've chosen to speak about this at all. Because for me, this is not abstract thinking. My garden is not just a garden. It is a place where my son was last alive. And I'm not saying that for sympathy points. I'm saying it because it explains why this topic carries a different weight for me than it might for someone else. When a space becomes connected to grief, memory, and meaning, you don't experience it as just the back garden. You experience it as something you are trying to honor and protect. So when the space is repeatedly affected by external factors outside your control, things that others may call minor, it can feel like more than an inconvenience. It becomes a question of respect, responsibility, consideration, and shared awareness. And that is why I'm approaching this calmly, because this issue isn't rage. The issue is the system that leaves people feeling like they have no voice in protecting the space that matters to them. Section 11. Conclusion and reflection. So in the end, this video isn't really about cats. It is about responsibility in modern shared living. It is about whether long-standing cultural assumptions deserve a calm re-examination as society evolves. And it is about having these conversations early, thoughtfully, before small repeated tensions turn into bigger community resentment. Because ignoring a blind spot doesn't make it disappear, it just pushes it into silence. And silence is where misunderstandings grow. So I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm not asking you to pick a side and start fighting in the comments. I'm asking something simpler. Can we talk about this honestly without pretending it's either harmless or evil? Can we admit its complexity and still worth having a discussion? Well, that's it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. And if you like what I do, please leave a like, subscribe, and most importantly, share this video so the conversation can reach more people. And if you have thoughts, opinions, and yes, even disagreements, feel free to leave them in the comments below. And until the next time, stay strong, stay curious, and keep forging your questline. Wishing you all well and good health. Take care. Woo! And cut, that's a wrap!